Okay, so welcome to Escape the Rat Race Radio, Ash and Hassan. How are you both today?
Excellent.
Super, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
And we're kind of doing a three-way Skype call here. So I always forget to mention that, we record all of the podcast interviews on video as well. So you can see all three of us if you head over to the Escape the Rat Race website. But Ash, I think you have the honour of perhaps being the only person that I've invited back for a second appearance on Escape the Rat Race Radio, because you first appeared on episode 29 way back, a long time ago now.
Wow, well, thank you very much for inviting me back. And I did promise at the end of that one, I think, that I'll be back in the new year. So I'm back.
You did. So it's great to have you back and great to be joined, obviously, by Hassan. So why don't you guys just share a little bit about, what you're both up to at the moment, how you first connected, and then we're going to talk about something pretty special that's happening right now.
Go on for it, Hassan.
Yeah, so my name is Hasan Kubba, and we've been working on this book for a while now, The Unfair Advantage. It's been like 3.5 years in the making, and it's based on our experiences as entrepreneurs. I kind of escaped the rat race myself, basically. I worked in the city very briefly after I graduated from university, and I just thought this really isn't for me. And about 4 months into it, after doing 2 different jobs and kind of doing sales jobs specifically, kind of more ones that would work on my sales skills in particular, I decided to go out on my own, start my own business. And that was around 2014, early 2014. And it took a couple of years of really hard work. And my goal was to get a kind of passive income stream coming in. And it's hard work, let me tell you. But I did get there in the end, and I kind of was able to travel and kind of enjoy myself and go out in Southeast Asian islands. And later on, when I met Ash, I took him to that side of the world as well, and he saw too how great it could be. And then I kind of came back to London, and that's actually where I met Ash. When I came back, I met Ash at a business dinner, and it was just one of those right place, right time kind of things, Christian. It was business dinners aren't usually what we go to, really. We haven't really been to any ever since. But there we were, sat next to each other, bonding over the food we're having and saying, this is a bit overrated, isn't it? and we became friends. I became Ash's investment partner. He had just had the IPO. I had a bit of free time because my business was running itself. And we started to get a lot of experience in investing in startup founders. And that's where the concept of the unfair advantage and the book came about, is as we were working, getting those pitches, kind of started to see who succeeds and who doesn't, and who has good progress in their startup, right? Who wants to get the funding. And we started to see patterns and unfair advantages all around. So this was the concept that we came up with. And actually, it started off with Ash having the idea, and then me working with him and developing it further and working on this book together, basically.
Yeah. So Ash, I'd definitely say for people listening right now, they can go back to episode 29, hear the full background story of obviously your time with Just Eat. But tell us what's been happening in the last couple of years.
Oh my God! So getting this book ready. I mean, I've been all over the world speaking about the unfair advantage, and it's been a pleasure and humbling to be able to share our stories and share the Just Eat story and all the stories of investing in startups and failing and succeeding around the world, and how people are connecting the dots and actually connecting with our authenticity of what we're sharing here with the unfair advantage and the book. And both me and Hassan bonded over bad food. We're both foodies, so we love good food, and we traveled for food, and we'll go anywhere for good food. So the bad steak was a way we bonded. And then on top of that, Hassan lived in Northwest London, and so do I. And it was easier in terms of proximity to be friends and stay in touch and have coffees more often. So it just shows you how your location and how close you are together makes a difference as well. So since then, I've been writing the book with Hassan, and we've been speaking all over the world. And also, I've launched another company called UHubs, which is a platform to teach people digital skills from expert coaches from around the world. And I've been working on that for the last year, and it's been a phenomenal journey around democratizing access to skills.
Yeah, it sure is. And I've been along to one of those, and it was a fantastic evening. So congratulations on that. And so I'm going to go in with a massive question here for you guys. So for people listening right now, you've obviously written The Unfair Advantage. It's out this week. So, launch day is January the 23rd. So everyone listening now, it's either a couple of days away or it's already out. So obviously head over to the links, which we'll give you later on in the show. But for someone listening right now who's stuck in the rat race, they are working hard to build their business, in any amount of spare time that they've got, evenings, weekends, early mornings. How can someone discover their unfair advantage to help them get out of the rat race?
Yeah, good question. Discovering your unfair advantage. So it kind of all starts with understanding how kind of success works, let's say, or even business success in particular. I grew up, and I know Ash did as well, watching a lot of self-help gurus, motivational speakers. Ash used to go to Tony Robbins. I used to go to those kinds of seminars as well. I used to love those stuff. And it was basically a case of thinking, they kind of tell you, you just need to work harder and you need to have the right strategies. And it's about doing this, that, and the other, and be disciplined and believe in yourself, right? It's kind of, those are the kind of themes that keep coming up. And the implication is that we are not super successes yet. We're not multimillionaires or even billionaires yet, just because we're not disciplined and hardworking enough. If we just hustled harder, if we just knew the right steps, then we'd succeed, and we'd all succeed. And the right steps is the same for everyone somehow. It's kind of this one size fits all. And coming from that background, and then getting the concept, the idea of like, wait a second, success doesn't, that's not the full picture. Right, Chris? It's not a case of just about working harder. It's not a case of just buckling down. For me, when I had my success of working I started a digital marketing agency. And it was hard work getting those initial clients, getting more clients on board, making it a recurring revenue business, making it automated and running itself. These were all challenges. And when I got to that stage where people thought I was working, I was just chilling and sending out invoices. I thought, I thought I deserved this. I paid my dues and I deserved all the success I had. Right, it was all because of me, and therefore I should be self-satisfied and happy with myself. And one of the things that I talk about this in my TED talk as well, my TEDx talk in London earlier this year. I spoke about how one of the insights I had, I was in the Philippines, I was in Manila, and I see these kids. I stayed in a very posh part of Manila in the Philippines. Lovely place, by the way. And I see some kids playing in the street, and they were barefoot and looked really scruffy. And I thought, oh, that looks unusual, and then I realized they're begging, actually. They're begging on the streets. And in that part of Manila, there wasn't anybody begging. I grew up in London, and people begging around the streets is quite normal here, right? But you kind of think to yourself that nobody's going to do that badly from it. Nobody's going to, end up starving or going to die from not having that stuff. But I actually had a bottle of water with me, and this little girl kind of points to the bottle of water in my hands. And I realized that she was thirsty. And I realized, okay, they don't have the safety nets here. They don't have the things here in the third world. And all the stuff we've taken for granted, all the unfair advantages we've had in our backgrounds, in where we grew up, in the education systems, in the safety nets, and all that kind of stuff, the healthcare, the stability, allowed us to have the success. So I kind of started thinking about unfair advantages in that way. And that made me realize that, okay, it wasn't just what I did. So in terms of finding your own, coming back to your question of finding your own unfair advantages, I started to look at myself and I thought, what were my unfair advantages? Well, native speaker of English is one, because I was born in Baghdad, actually, in Iraq, kind of war-torn country, lucky to come out and come to London. Secondly, I had the friends and family network here, who I got my initial clients from, like friends of friends. It was like my aunt's friend, husband was one of my first clients. And, these kinds of things kind of really help you out. And what you're naturally good at as well. Everyone has kind of innate talents, and it took me a while to discover mine. But I realized one of mine is in sales, is in speaking to people, building trust in a relationship. And again, that got me started getting my first few clients in London. So your unfair advantages, we kind of break them down in the book into what we call the Miles framework. And Ash can break that down, I think, next, because I know I've been talking for a while. But essentially, you can break them down into different categories. And you can look at yourself, and do an audit and kind of think, what do I have going for me? What am I good at? What circumstances do I have? Do I have money I can invest Can I do something? Do I have the credibility to raise funding? Can I do my own app? Do I know the coding or the coding background? Or do I know people who can do that? So these are all things that we can consider unfair advantages because you didn't necessarily work for them. You might have just lucked into them, right? So it's kind of about looking at yourself and kind of doing that audit.
And Ash, perhaps you can share that Miles framework, but before that, ask a question that actually, you know, we talk about escaping the rat race, and by no means do I ever, you know, talk about a job as a bad thing, right? And there's probably a lot of unfair advantages to actually being in employment, right? You know, you've got an income, you can invest that in your business. There are many skills, you're getting free training perhaps. What are some of the other ones that perhaps, you know, people should take advantage of if they're still in employment?
That's a really good question, Christian, and I totally agree with you. Although we are entrepreneurs, we don't say entrepreneurship is for everybody. And 75% of people hate their jobs, according to statistics and data. I can't remember where that was from. But if you're hating your job and not liking getting up in the morning and going to work, then you need to really think about what you're doing, because this is going to be your life. And the second thing you need to think about is your responsibilities in life. Like you said, you might have a family, you might have a mortgage, and you need to make sure that you are accountable for that as well. But there's other advantages you can get at work. But it's knowing that working, hope that you can actually still be an entrepreneur. You can be an entrepreneur at any age. That's the other thing. People think that entrepreneurship is for the young people, but it's not. You can be 50, 60. I think KFC, Mr. Colonial, how old was he when he was?
Yeah, he was like 56 or something.
56,
yeah.
Right? So, I mean, you can start companies much later. The average age, according to the startup world, is actually 40, I think. So, you know, so don't think that it's too late. That's the other thing about entrepreneurship. You think, oh my God, I'm losing time and I need to be, you know, you need to get out of this. When you're young and you're in the workforce, you're actually getting experience. And one of the biggest values that you can get by working somewhere is you can actually see problems firsthand. So if you can solve a problem that might help something in your company, it might be something that will be useful for the sector or the industry. And that's coming back from what we call the intelligence side of the Miles framework. So we talk about intelligence and insight, and that's insight. So insight is really important. So you can gain that at work. The second thing is you can build a team. Most of my co-founders and team that I work with now are ex-work colleagues and people I've worked with in the past. And people who are investing in their other startups are people I've worked with because I know how they work. So that is very important. And another thing is you also get to learn a lot about the emotional intelligences of working in teams, because when you become an entrepreneur, most likely you're going to start off with a small team or by yourself, and it's very lonely. So understanding how to deal with that loneliness is quite difficult at first, but then knowing how to work with a team is also important. So the emotional intelligence, the thing that we talk about in intelligence and insight, is really important. So there's lots to gain from staying in work and being in the right field. I think the key thing is to make sure that you enjoy the journey and learn as much as you can. I think learning is the new key element of working in a workplace. If you're not learning and growing, then you really need to consider why you're there and what's the purpose of it. Because if it's just a job to pay the salary and pay the mortgage, then that's going to really make you feel disheartened. And you always want to become an entrepreneur then, or to jump ship. But it's not always the right answer at that point.
Mm. And Has, are there any other elements of the Miles framework there that you want to add to as well?
That was a really good. So insight is a massive one, and that's huge for coming up with a business idea. But yeah, let's break it down because we haven't broken it down to your audience what it is. So the Miles framework is an acronym. Miles stands for money, intelligence and insight, which Ash touched on there, location and luck, right place, right time. And is how Ash and I met, and a lot of things come from right place, right time. I'm sure even in your life, Christian. Education and expertise is for E, and S is for status. And status is a really big one. So just to touch on education and expertise, is what we like to think of as how you come up with your solution. Your education and expertise helps you. So the intelligence and insight helps you find the need, and the education and expertise helps you to fill the need, solve the need, come up with a product or service that fills that need, right? And then status is huge, because status is about how you come across. And this is where things like unconscious biases come into play, what kind of accent you've got, who you know is huge. That's what they say, it's not what you know, it's who you know. There's some truth to that. So status is massive because it's how you come across, so how others perceive you, and then also how you perceive yourself plays a big role in that as well, your inner status. So that affects how confident you come across and how you interact with others. And it's also your network, as I said, who you know. So that kind of breaks down the miles framework. And then it's on the foundation of mindset, because without the right mindset, you can't do anything.
Yeah, absolutely agree. What are some of the traits that let me ask you, Ash. I know you've both worked with so many startups. What's the core things that you see in successful entrepreneurs, between the ones that make it and the ones that just give up? Is it a mindset thing? Is it a skills thing? What is it that's the differentiator between those that are successful and those that aren't?
Yeah, it's a massive question. I think it varies from person to person and location to location. But one of the things I realized is that you have to answer the why you're doing what you're doing in the first place. And I think by answering that question of why, it brings you back down to your purpose and what you want to do as your purpose in life and what kind of impact you want to have. And I think a lot of people start a company just because they can make money. Then they're going to lose that purpose and sense of why eventually, and they're going to stop. There's companies that I've been in companies where I've made lots of money, but then all of a sudden I've just lost my mission for why I was doing it, and I really felt disheartened about it. And it's actually, I never went back to my root of why, and I started only because I had a lot of unfair advantages to get the business started really quickly and scale. And I forgot to answer that on my own personal question of why am I doing this? So when you look at entrepreneurship, I think you find a lot of the most successful entrepreneurs that I've come across right now have been the underdogs, or the underrated or underestimated, and they have the resilience and the grit to get through things. And I find that most entrepreneurs who are successful feel like they have nothing to lose. And I think that's really where it becomes interesting when you're working full time, you got a job and you got money to lose and potentially a house to lose if you got a mortgage, compared to if you feel like you've got nothing to lose. And having that mindset of the underdog is quite important. And I think that's really something which I've seen across most of the entrepreneur traits. And there's lots of other traits as well. The timing is very important for the right idea, the right time, for example. It's critical, for example, most success in startups is timing, and knowing when the right time is to launch something. You can't always know that. Even the guys at Google didn't know that. They tried to sell Google to Yahoo for $1 million. They said no, and they carried on doing it. And look at where Google is now. So there's lots of things that you don't realize in the past that we have. And I think the other thing is when people are listening to the entrepreneur heroes, there's a lot of narrative fallacy of people listening to stories which they forget about how it really happened. And I think when you really go back down to it and look at the traits of people, and I see them, I ultimately find that the best entrepreneurs are the entrepreneurs who choose themselves first.
Yeah. And playing the long game, would you agree that you have to have that mindset that it's not going to happen overnight and there's going to be loads of bumps along the way, and you're playing the long game here?
Yeah,
absolutely. There's no straight line to success. It's a really squiggly, long journey to the process. And you get to learn about who you are through the downs, and that's why having a good team and co-founders around you is very essential. I mean, when I was writing the book with Hassan, we had some very late nights and some weekends where we were just away working on the book and thrashing it out. And there were moments where I just wanted to just throw the towel in and go, I've had enough now. But we just carried on. And I think bouncing from each other and having that ability to work with each other was really, really important for me anyway. But I only knew that from self-understanding of who I am. Most companies I always start with a co-founder. I never try and do it myself because I know my weaknesses and I know my strengths. And I think I'm getting to learn them as I go along through life as well. So I think it's knowing your strengths and weaknesses is very important. I think most of the top entrepreneurs I know are very self-aware as well. They're really self-aware. They know where to plug the gaps. They're much more self-aware than normal people in the workforce. Yeah.
I just want to reinforce that point you mentioned there about, starting with co-founders, because when I first met you, Ash, it was back at Junior's event, the Entrepreneur Academy London, and it was something that you talked about on stage, which really resonated with me and from my experience of running Escape the Rat Race, for the last 5 years on my own, it's tough when it's all you. The decisions are just on your head. It's difficult. So, I totally, for anyone listening, would say definitely, if you're at the early stages of a business, look at who's around you. Who can you perhaps partner up with? Anything to add from your side, Hass, on that?
Yeah, definitely. So I was a solo founder myself. And the full story is I actually didn't start a job and think it was kind of straight out of university. I did economics at university, and the typical path from there, when you go to a good uni and you're ambitious, is banking in the city in London. That's if you want a high-paying job. But what didn't appeal to me is having that boss, working on something that I don't necessarily have a passion for. So from the beginning, I decided, no, I don't want to do that. So I just took time off and started to think. And that's when I got interested in starting my own business. And I realized, and I really tried, Christian. I really had this idea, and I started setting up a website, and I just couldn't launch it. My perfectionist tendencies got the better of me, and I just didn't have the strong deadline. I had some savings saved up for my student loan, and it was tough. And that's the kind of being accountable to anyone when you're just starting out, right? It's really difficult to get going. But then what made the difference for me is I got those jobs in the city. I worked as an alternative investments broker in kind of a very salesy position. And then I did B2B sales also in the city. And what I learned from there was massive. So the skill set I got from it. But then the second time round, I again left and tried to launch. And that time I succeeded. But the biggest differentiator was that I had an accountability partner that time. So it was actually somebody else who was starting their own business at the same time. So I really think that's valuable. So it's a non-competing business, but we can kind of help each other out, sit next to each other when we're working. We used to sit in the Starbucks overlooking Wembley Stadium and just kind of going, come on, we could do this. And being a sounding board for each other. Just doing it completely by yourself, it's too difficult, I think, or very difficult to achieve.
I mean, there are some people who can try to do it, but then you need your family supporting you as well. You know, like when you're working full time, I think the challenge is then to say, right, I'm going to go and be an entrepreneur, but how do you convince the people around you to support you as well?
Yeah.
And it's like everyone's like, well, it's not going to work out, and there's pressure around you. And so this is why money, the money part of the miles framework is important, because you need to have enough savings in your bank account to be able to ride the wave of not being able to get clients and money, cash coming into the company. And I think that's something which people don't talk about much. They don't talk about how to fail correctly, or they don't talk about how to create a cushion for failure so that you can get started again. And jobs will always be there. You can always go back to your job. And funny thing about working and being an entrepreneur is that I know a lot of entrepreneurs who've had their first angel investment from the boss they worked with. Right?
So
and that's an interesting, right? Because they've had such a great relationship, and the boss is like, right, if he doesn't work out, come back. But I really love the idea that you're working on. And Richard Branson does this with his company, Virgin. I did a deal with Virgin back in Just Eat days, and I remember talking to some people like, if you have a big enough idea and you want to leave and you're a top employee, Richard Branson will actually offer to invest in your company, so you can still be part of your success, and knowing that is a good person.
That's cool.
Right? And that's the same thing with James Caan, a recruitment company. When someone wants to leave there, he's like, right, I'll invest in your company. So it's a very clever way of actually, and then as an employee, you can still think about having that process, because some people want to grab the bull by the horns and do it themselves and take the risks on as well. But then working with somebody who's already been there and done that is quite interesting. And a lot of people will start companies which are in the same domain or where they're working. But if you've got a passion that's completely outside of it, I'm working as a equities trader, and all of a sudden I want to make an ice cream company. You know, I need enough money in the bank to make sure I balance it up, because I haven't got the domain expertise. I'm going to go through loads of flavors before I get it right. And then I need to get a partner. So you start thinking about, and that's how you develop your unfair advantage. It's like, it's specific to the project or the circumstances of what you're trying to create. It's not just a one size fits all kind of concept.
So Has, are there any other examples that you can maybe draw upon in the book for someone listening right now? They're saying, yeah, I like this concept of unfair advantage. What's kind of like a checklist of things for people to start thinking about right now? And maybe there's an example that you can share of how someone else has done that.
So thinking about your unfair advantages, how to go about. I think it's a case, so it comes about because Ash and I would get pitched by so many startup founders, or they say, I have this idea, and it's like, it's completely out of any domain of expertise or any network that they have, or, you know, they've got no way into it, right? So a great example is a guy by the name of Tristan Walker. He founded a company called Walker and Company. And basically he started off as the entrepreneur in residence at Andreessen Horowitz. Basically, it's a huge venture capital firm in Silicon Valley, one of the most legendary ones. And he was being mentored directly by one of the founders there. And they gave him 6 months to think of an idea because they believed that he has some potential and they wanted to help him out. So he came up with all sorts of different ideas, right, to solve global obesity, freight and shipping, to try to solve, I think at one point he was even trying to think about hunger and banking. So all these big, juicy problems in areas where there's obviously a lot of money and you need a lot of expertise to solve. And ultimately, what his Walker and Company ended up being, his company, the company that he founded, was a shaving company, right? So he went from these big things where he had no specific insights or expertise in, and he went to something which was about shaving. And now, why did he choose that? It was really interesting because he was actually African American, and he started to look around at his network and what he's experienced in his life and the pain points he's had, right? So a great way to think of an idea is look for pain. So he realized that these multi-blade razors like Gillette and Wilkins Sword or whatever other brands, they create lots of ingrown hairs for men with thick curly beard hairs. So there's the ingrown hairs and razor burn and irritation. And he thought there has to be a solution for this. And he looked into it, and basically you just need a single blade razor, and that's the solution. So he created a very clever system around it of how to prepare your face, created a nice brand, used some rappers to help promote it, like Nas, who's actually also into VC stuff. And eventually, after a few years of work on that, he sold it to Procter & Gamble, who owned Gillette, for $30 million. Wow. So it's really interesting, like, discovery journey that he went on. Like, even with that kind of guidance that he had, he was completely going down the wrong path until he thought, okay, what do I have experience in? Maybe I can scratch my own itch.
Yeah.
And now, of course, scratching your own itch, in other words, solving a problem that you yourself experience, isn't the only path. You can actually research something completely outside of your own experience and just go for it. I mean, that's what Jeff Bezos did for Amazon, right? He just saw in '94, he was working with Wall Street, and he saw this internet thing was building up, and he thought, you know what? I think retail is going to go on the internet. And he decided to found Amazon based on that insight. So it's not the only way, but it's a great way. So it's just a case of, like, looking at yourself. What are you strong at? What's your network in? What kind of insights do you have? And kind of going from there.
Yeah. And I think the key there is taking action upon that idea, right? So I'm sure everyone listening right now, ourselves included, if we really just took 20 minutes, we could think of some things in our lives that we could improve, or that we have a better way perhaps that we would do it. But most people then don't do anything with it, right? So the difference is actually taking that first step. But many people let fear perhaps get in the way of that. And, you know, anyone listening right now who maybe is nodding their head in agreement going, yeah, I know, I just haven't got started. You know, any tips, Ash, or anything to say to those people?
I think I can see a lot of people are in that stage as well. And you're right, they're probably nodding their head going, yeah, I've got loads of ideas. And I meet people with lots of ideas all the time. And I meet them every year. And they'll come for a coffee every year, and they'll be going through the 10th idea. And I'm like, what happened to the 9th one? What happened to the 8th one? And they'll be going, well, I thought I changed my mind, and I've gone to a new one. And they really want to jump ship, or they want to do something for themselves. I think, look, if you found an idea that you're really passionate about, and you really feel there's a need for it and there's a problem for it, I think you should test it as quick as possible. The key is to test things. And I think we come into this mindset that where you have to jump ship completely from work and go, right, I've got to do this. I've got this idea. I've got to do it now. I've got to stop work, though. That's not the blocker. The blocker is actually our own mindset. Our own mindset is the thing that's blocking us from saying, why don't I develop what we call an MVP, a minimum viable product, or a thing that we can use to test this idea and actually see if people do feel there's a problem with this, because then that will excite you. And if there is traction, that will excite you. If there isn't traction, then you have to try and find where traction, meaning momentum, in people are saying, yeah, I've got the same problem, I'd pay for that. Then you probably want to go back to square one again and think about your idea. Too many people think it's about the idea, but it's not about the idea. It's about the execution and about the sales and marketing. And I say this a lot to people that, you know, most companies and most startups fail, not because they can't develop the ideas, because they can't get route to market. They can't get distribution. They can't get the product out or the service out. And that's where you should start thinking about partnership or opportunities to work with other people if you can't do that bit. But the idea in itself of, if you don't do this now, and later in life, you'll be probably thinking to yourself, I regret not doing that. And I think it's the regret. And you need to answer that question of regret. And I think it's trying things. I think we live in a culture right now, especially in Britain, where we're not told to try things. And if we fail, it's like, oh my God, you're a big failure. But you're not. You're not a loser. You're not a failure. You're a tinkerer. I think the tinkerers are the ones which are going to succeed. And I think if you have a tinkering mindset, that will allow you to get started. You don't want to just develop. When we had the idea for the book, it wasn't just like, right, we're going to have this amazing book. It was actually, we've got this idea for a book and it was first draft. And it was horrible, Christian. The first draft was like, oh my God, right? But that's what got us started onto the journey, right? And that's where I think tinkering and movement and momentum is important. And then also knowing that when you're tinkering, you can stop. And knowing when to stop is also important, because then there's an opportunity cost of other things that you can try. So don't just get too wound up about this one idea. Think about how it's going to work first and try and find the low-hanging fruit and discover yourself what your own unfair advantage is to accelerate the growth. When we talk about the unfair advantage in a book, we talk about it as speed. So your unfair advantage is when you're developing a startup or a business, it's about the speed at which you can develop this business. So you might have the insight, the knowledge, the partnerships, the distribution, the marketing skills, whatever it is that will get you to market really fast. And I think that's something which you should identify in your own self as a employee.
Yeah, I like that. Really great advice. Yeah, definitely all about that proof of concept, isn't it? Just getting it out there, testing, getting feedback. So, Hasan, is there anything that we've not yet covered with the unfair advantage that you would like to share?
Yeah. So the book is broken down into 3 parts. Part 1 is all about understanding what an unfair advantage is and how success works. And it's not a pure meritocracy. It's not purely luck either. It's somewhere in between. And everybody's unique. It's all about knowing your circumstances, your strengths, weaknesses, personality, motivations are all unique. That's part 1. Part 2 is kind of doing that audit, understanding the Miles concepts and how it works. And for example, intelligence and how it's not just about IQ, it's about emotional intelligence and creativity as well, and how to be creative with interdisciplinary thinking. But part 3 is about how to start. It's the quick start guide. We wanted to give a very accessible, very easy way to think, how do I begin with a startup? And one of the things that we broke down is there's 2 types of startups, right? There's 2. One is the kind of startup that we hear about and that become these huge tech titans like Google and Facebook and Amazon and Netflix and all these kinds of things. We call them hyper growth startups. They usually need a lot of funding. They're usually not profitable in the early days. And they're all about scaling up and becoming huge. And that's what makes people into billionaires and stuff, right? The big stories. But there's also lifestyle startups, right? You hear this concept of lifestyle businesses, right? And it's kind of often spoken about sometimes in a condescending way, like it's not that great. Yeah, oh, it's just a lifestyle business. Actually, a lifestyle business can be amazing, can give you an amazing lifestyle, amazing work-life balance. It can give you an amazing income. You could be very wealthy. You might not be a billionaire, but who needs to be a billionaire to be happy, right? It's just a case of like, you'll be earning, 10 times what you'd earn in a job with a lifestyle business. With a small team, if you can learn to systemize and automate things and have it as a digital and online business, it's amazing, right? So my experiences as a lifestyle startup founder and learning about tech startups because we were investing in them and mentoring them, because my background is marketing and growth and strategy. But Ash has a lot more experience. Ash has experience on both sides, but Just Eat was a hyper-growth startup itself, right? So that distinction is very important. And we often have people, coming to pitch us or telling us about their ideas, and it's usually a hyper-growth startup idea. And it's like, not usually, but often they don't have those unfair advantages to make that work. They don't have a computer science background. They don't know any technical co-founders who can code the app or whatever it is that they're developing, the software. They don't have the money to put into it to be able to live without having a personal income, right? So there's all these unfair advantages that they're missing. They don't have that status and credibility to be able to raise funding from VCs and investors early on, right? They're not ex-Google or ex-Facebook or dropped out of Stanford or Harvard or Oxford or Cambridge. So that's where unfair advantages really come into play. It's like figuring out, okay, what kind of startup do I need to find out? And what kind of lifestyle do I want? Again, going back to your why as well. So it's a very important concept, and it's really one that people need to be clear on. And sometimes a lifestyle startup can become a scale-up, a hyper-growth startup as well. But it depends on the total addressable market. And we kind of address all of those things in part 3 of the book, which is the quick start guide.
So, how do people get hold of this book? It's out this week. And do you reckon, guys, you could perhaps sign a copy and we can give one away to one lucky listener?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's do
I'm
that.
sure we can do that, Christian.
Let's do that. And then for everyone else, where's the website for the Unfair Advantage and social media, all the usual places people can go and find out more?
Yeah, theunfairadvantage.co.uk. That's the website. You can find out more about it. It's going to be available. Well, it is available for pre-order on Amazon, on Waterstones, WH Smith. It's going to be in all the airports and train stations. See, we were going to self-publish it at first, and the last time you spoke to Ash, it was going to be a self-published thing. But since then, we've gotten a book deal, and it's been like a crazy journey. So it's been really cool.
Yeah,
we've been selected as non-fiction book of the month from WH Smith. So it's awesome. So you can find us any good bookshop, guys.
Yeah, I know what
if you're traveling into China or Taiwan or somewhere, you might even get a copy of our book there because it's been translated. So
wow,
that's an interesting thing as well. So look, you can get it from Amazon, all the major bookstores. My place where I pick up books is the travel bookshop. So every time I'm traveling, it's the airport bookshop, which is a W.A. Smith Travel. We'll be there, and please get a copy. Give us a review and tell us what you think about the Unfair Advantage, and tell us what your unfair advantage is, and we'll happily sign the copy of the book if you come and see us at any events that we're doing across London this year.
Yeah, and I know it's been a long journey with getting the book to launch, but you've done a great job. And for anyone listening right now who's thinking about writing a book, a word from you, Ash?
Oh wow! Don't do it. No. Look, if you've really got a passion for something and a mission, then come and talk to us, because we've had a lot of people speak to us, and we use the same startup methodology of the lean startup writing our book as well. And we can show you how we did that. And you don't have to just go out there and say, right, I'm going to do a one big off novel or a book in itself. So writing a book has been a big journey. It's taken us 3.5 years to get here. But the book has got 20 years, 25 years, 30 years of our experiences combined together in that book. And the research that Hasan has done in some of the startups that we worked with, and the interviews we've done, I'm sure it's not as easy as people think, but definitely give us a shout if you're interested, because we can help you understand the quick ways of knowing how to do it.
Yeah, it's an awesome book, absolutely packed full of content, and I'm sure it's going to be a huge success for you both. So thank you, Hasan. Thank you, Ash, for being on Skate the Rat Race Radio today. I know it's going to be a manic week for you, and good luck once again.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.